I drove all the way out here, and now you're telling me I can't return it. This is unacceptable.
Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we can arrange for a pickup instead.
The parking lot of a suburban supermarket in the late afternoon. It wasn't quite dark yet. Sunlight still clung to the windows of the parked cars. The crowds thinned, the only sounds being the rolling wheels of shopping carts on the asphalt and the occasional opening and closing of car doors. A black man in his early 40s pushed a shopping cart out the door. He wore jeans and a dark jacket. Nothing remarkable about him. No one seeing him for the first time would think he possessed any special power or status. He stopped in front of a black luxury SUV parked near the entrance. He took the keys from his pocket, unlocked the door, and then bent down to load his shopping bags into the back seat. Everything happened slowly, familiarly, like thousands of shopping trips before. A few parking spaces away, a white couple stood. At first, they just watched. Then they watched longer than necessary. The woman said nothing, but her gaze never left the man and the car. She took out her phone, but didn't dial. Just held it in her hand. The man stood with his arms crossed, leaning against his car, his head slightly tilted, as if assessing something. The black man noticed the gaze. He looked up briefly, then continued packing. He didn't react, didn't ask any questions, didn't show any annoyance. As he closed the last bag, the man in the couple stepped forward. "Hey," he said, "what are you doing with that car?" The voice wasn't loud, but clear enough to break the silence of the parking lot. The black man turned, slightly surprised. "Excuse me, that car isn't yours." The other man continued, "I saw you back it in. The keys are still in the car." The black man straightened up, placing his hand on the car door. "This is my car," he said calmly. "I'm just packing." The woman then gave a sharp, short laugh. "We know who usually drives cars like this around here," she said. No one said what they were thinking, but everyone understood. The black man looked at them for a moment. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't justify himself. He just said, "If you have nothing else to say, please continue. Good evening." He turned back to his car, his hand on the trunk, but they didn't leave. And it was at that moment, when a perfectly normal situation wasn't allowed to end normally, that things began to spiral out of control. The black man had just turned back toward the SUV when the man in the couple took another step, close enough to block him from the car door. "Wait," he said. "You want to explain where you got that car?" The black man stopped. He slowly turned, keeping his distance. "I don't need to tell you my story," he replied. "You should back off." The woman, who had been standing behind him, now raised her phone higher. "If you didn't do anything wrong, why are you so tense?" she said. "Innocent people don't act like that." The black man's tone didn't change. "I'm not tense. I'm being harassed." He reached into his pocket, took out the keys again. He pressed the lock button. The SUV beeped a short beep. The rearview mirrors automatically folded in. "See," he said, "my car." The man gave a wry smile. "Professional thieves do this all the time." He replied immediately, "Do you think we're stupid?" The woman didn't wait any longer. Her finger touched the screen. The call connected. "Yes. Hello." Her voice changed instantly. "We're in the East Ridge supermarket parking lot. There's a black man trying to steal a luxury SUV." The black man looked directly at her. "That's a false report," he said clearly. "You should stop." She turned her back to him, continuing to speak into the phone. "He's still here. He won't leave the car. He's behaving very suspiciously." A few people around them began to slow down. A passing car slowed down. The atmosphere in the parking lot became heavy. The black man held his hands in front of his chest, making no unnecessary movements. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, "because I haven't done anything wrong." The man crossed his arms, his voice firm. "The police will handle this." The call ended. The woman lowered her phone. Her eyes no longer filled with doubt but certainty. "You should prepare your explanation," she said, "because this isn't over." The black man glanced around the parking lot once more. Eyes were on him. Phones began to be pulled from pockets. A simple situation, a suspicion, a call, and in just a few minutes, an ordinary moment would turn into a confrontation with the system. The sound of police sirens blared before anyone could say anything more. A patrol car, its lights flashing, pulled into the parking lot, its wheels rolling slowly but decisively. A few seconds later, a second one followed closely behind. 2 officers stepped out almost simultaneously. Both were in uniform, their hands at their hips in professional fashion. They didn't glance around the parking lot to assess the situation. They stared directly at the black man standing next to the SUV. The man in the pair immediately stepped forward, pointing. "That's him," he said quickly. "We saw him trying to steal this car." No one asked him to stop. No one told him to step back. One officer nodded slightly, as if the story was clear. The black man stood still, his hands outstretched. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "this is my car. They're making a false report." An officer stepped forward, standing directly opposite him, close enough to exert pressure. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he said. "Where's your ID?" "In my wallet, in my back pocket," the black man replied. "Don't take it out," the officer said immediately. "Just stand still." The other officer moved to the side, standing slightly behind the black man, his eyes constantly glancing at the SUV before turning back to him. It was a familiar position in these inspection situations. "Whose car is this?" the officer in front asked. "Mine. Registered in my name," he answered. The woman crossed her arms, her voice slightly louder. "Impossible. He doesn't look like someone who owns that kind of car." There was no prompting from the police. No one asked her to be quiet. The officer looked the black man up and down. "How did you buy this car?" The black man paused for a moment. "That's irrelevant," he said. "You can check the license plate." The officer behind him leaned toward his colleague. "He's defensive," he said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "I'm not defensive," the black man said. "I'm being falsely accused." A few people in the crowd began to murmur. Someone pulled out their phone, the screen facing them. The officer in front changed his tone. "Step back from the car while we investigate." "I'm not consenting to a search," the black man said immediately. "And I haven't done anything wrong." The officer took another step. "That's not a requirement." His hand rested on the black man's arm, not forcefully, but long enough to send a clear message. The scales had tipped, and from that moment on, every subsequent action ceased to be about seeking the truth, and instead focused on controlling people. The hand on his arm didn't tighten its grip, but it didn't withdraw either. It stayed there longer than necessary. The black man didn't flinch. He didn't react. He just remained in the same position, his hands still exposed. "I'm not resisting," he said, "but I don't agree to be treated like a criminal." The officer behind him took another half step, standing closer, close enough for him to feel the breath on the back of his neck. No one touched him again, but the space around him had narrowed. Put your hands up where we can see them. The officer in front repeated, My hands are here. He replied, raising them slightly higher. I'm cooperating. The woman behind the officer chuckled briefly. He's always arguing, she said. Innocent people don't talk that much. The officer didn't interrupt her. Instead, he turned to the black man. You seem quite tense. I'm surrounded and falsely accused, he said. I think anyone would be worried. A shopping cart pulled up nearby. A middle-aged man slowly stepped over, glanced over, then pulled out his phone. Another man did the same. Cameras began to appear. The officer tilted his head, his voice low but sharp. How much did you pay for this cart? The black man looked him straight in the eye. That's none of your business. The officer's jaw tightened. I asked, So you answer? I'm not obligated, he replied. You can verify ownership through proper procedure. The officer behind him chuckled softly. It seems you think the law doesn't apply to you. The black man turned his head for the first time, looking him straight in the eye. The law applies to everyone, he said slowly, including you. That statement changed the atmosphere completely. The officer in front stepped forward, standing completely between him and the SUV. All right, he said. Move away from the car. Now. The black man looked around. Eyes. Phones. The couple behind him. Arms crossed. More confident than before. He took a small step back. As instructed. Immediately. The officer behind him followed, closing the distance again. No need to stand so close, he said. Where I stand is my business. The officer replied. At this point, no one was asking where the truth lay. No one was looking for evidence. The only goal now was control. And the line between an inspection and an arrest was blurring with each passing second. The atmosphere in the parking lot was now heavy, as if it were pressing down on his chest. The black man stood still, his hands still exposed, his shoulders straight but not tense. He knew any movement at this moment could be interpreted unfavorably. You are under investigation, the officer in front said, his voice more decisive than before. For what crime? The black man asked. I need to know why I'm being held. The officer didn't answer immediately. He glanced at his colleague behind him, then back at the black man. Suspicious conduct. That's not a crime, he replied, and you haven't verified anything yet. The woman crossed her arms and shook her head. See, she said. He always argues. Typical guilty conscience. The officer behind him leaned forward, his voice low but threatening. Watch your words, he said. You're making this worse for yourself. The black man didn't turn around. Threatening me doesn't make this accusation any more legitimate. A few murmurs arose from the crowd. He has the right to ask. Why didn't he run away with the license plate? The officer in front spun around, shouting toward the crowd. Move aside. This isn't your business. The camera continued recording. The officer turned back to the black man. Turn around. For what reason? He asked. Turn around. The officer repeated, his voice now unyielding. The black man took a deep breath. I'm not resisting, he stated clearly, but I request to be present for supervision. The officer behind him chuckled briefly. Everyone demands supervision when things aren't going their way. That's my right, he replied. For that moment, the crowd nearly held their breath. A woman whispered, Oh my God. This is going too far. The officer in front looked at the black man for a few seconds, as if considering something. Finally, he turned away. pressing a button on his shoulder-mounted radio. "Center," he said, his voice clearly irritated. "Send surveillance to the East Ridge parking lot." He released his hand from the radio, turned back, his eyes cold. "Don't move." The black man stood still, hands open, eyes staring straight ahead. The officer behind him remained close enough to remind him that control had not yet left them. The inspection had turned into a test of power. And now, everything depended on who would step out of the next car. Time dragged on uncomfortably slowly. No one spoke another word. The black man stood still, his hands still exposed, his breathing even but deep. He no longer looked at the SUV. He stared straight ahead, at the officers standing there. The crowd around them grew thicker. Phones were held up to chest level, openly displayed. No one shouted. No one pushed. But everyone was recording. The supervisor's car appeared at the edge of the parking lot. It stopped. The engine off. The door open. An older officer stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes scanning the scene before approaching. The husband in the couple immediately stepped forward. "Thank God," he said. He was trying to steal the car. It was suspicious from the start. The supervisor raised his hand. "I'll talk to you later," he said briefly. Then turned to the two officers. "What's going on?" The officer in front answered immediately. "The subject is acting suspiciously, possibly attempting to steal the vehicle. Uncooperative." The black man spoke, his voice still calm. "That's not true. The vehicle is registered in my name. They made a false 911 call." The supervisor looked at him, then at the SUV, then at the couple. "What's your name?" "Daniel Brooks." The supervisor glanced at the officer in front of him. There was a brief pause, then a reluctant nod. "You may take it out," the officer said. Daniel Brooks slowly took out his wallet, just as he had been instructed. He handed the ID to the supervisor. The officer took it, glanced at it, then stopped. He looked again, more closely, turned it over, then looked up at Brooks. No one said anything, but something had changed. The supervisor stepped aside, raising the radio to his shoulder. He spoke softly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear a name, a unit, a request for confirmation. Meanwhile, the husband shook his head, saying to the younger officer, "I don't care who he is. A man like that wouldn't naturally drive like that." The younger officer nodded reflexively. The supervisor's radio played a reply. He listened, his face expressionless. But his posture noticeably changed. His back straighter, his shoulders more squared. He turned back to the group. "Reynolds, Grant." He called the two officers' names. "Come here." The pair looked at each other, beginning to feel uneasy. The supervisor looked directly at the two officers. "Do you know who the man standing before you is?" Both shook their heads. The supervisor took a slow breath, and in that moment, the entire parking lot almost held its breath because the truth was so close. And it could no longer be ignored. The supervisor stood upright, his gaze shifting from the two officers to the black man standing calmly in the parking lot. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a fuss. He spoke just enough. "This man," he said slowly, "is Chief Daniel Brooks." There was no gasp, no immediate reaction, only silence. Officer Reynolds froze, his eyes blinking briefly, as if his brain needed another beat to process the information. Officer Grant instinctively took a half-step back, then stood still, his hands hanging down. The man in the pair let out a short, forced laugh. Not funny. he said. "Don't joke like that." The supervisor turned to look at him. "I'm not joking." The woman standing next to him turned pale. The phone in her hand slipped lower, almost falling from her grasp. Daniel Brooks finally spoke. His voice remained unchanged. Not any louder. No colder words. "I've only been transferred to this city for a little over a month," he said. "And yes, this is my territory." No one said anything more. The ringing phones didn't vibrate. There was no whisper. All eyes were on the two officers. Resonder swallowed. Grant avoided Brooks's gaze, his eyes fixed on the asphalt. The supervisor turned to Brooks. "Sir," he said, "I apologize for how this situation has unfolded." Brooks nodded once. "No need for apologies now," he said. "Everything has been recorded." He looked at the two officers. "I want a full report, and I want the whole thing reviewed." Resonder opened his mouth, then closed it again. Grant said nothing. The man in the pair stepped forward, his voice higher, tinged with irritation. "Wait," he said. "So that's it. We only reported suspicious behavior." Brooks looked at him, his gaze eerily calm. "You reported behavior that didn't happen," he said, "and that'll be handled." The supervisor turned to the two officers. "Release him." They immediately stepped back. Brooks bent down to pick up the bags, opened the car door. Before getting in, he paused, turning his head to look at the group. "We're not done yet," he said softly. The SUV started, leaving the parking lot, leaving behind a heavy silence and a system that had just been forced to confront itself. The SUV disappeared from the parking lot. No one watched for long. All eyes turned back to those who remained. The supervisor stood still for a few seconds, as if to ensure everything had calmed down. Then he turned to the two officers. "Reynolds, Grant." His voice was deep and decisive. "You two stand next to the patrol car. Right now. No questions. No delayed response." Both turned and walked away, their steps heavy, a stark contrast to the confident stride they had taken upon their arrival. The supervisor then turned to the couple. "You two stay," he said. "We need to clarify a few things." The woman spoke first, her voice now devoid of its initial certainty. We were just worried." The supervisor didn't respond immediately. "Which of you called 911? She raised her hand slowly, her eyes scanning the parking lot, where several phones were still recording. "What did you report?" the supervisor asked. "That a man tried to break into the car," she said, her voice trailing off. "Did you see him break the lock?" She hesitated. "No." "Did you see him use force on the car?" "No." The supervisor nodded, making a note in his notebook. The husband began to get impatient. "Wait," he said. "We have the right to be suspicious. He's acting very strangely." The supervisor turned to him. "Suspicion isn't proof," he said, "and making a false report is a serious matter." In the distance, Reynolds and Grant stood beside the patrol car, silent, their eyes no longer on the crowd. Their body cameras were still running. The supervisor gestured for another officer to come and assist. "Separate them," he said. "Take their statements separately." The pair looked at each other, for the first time all afternoon. They didn't seem to be on the same side. The crowd began to disperse, but not completely. A few remained, as if they understood that the story wasn't over, it had just moved to a different stage. And this time, no one could control it with words or prejudice anymore. 15 minutes later, the parking lot was empty. But the story was far from over. The supervisor, standing next to the patrol car, spoke briefly into the radio. Requests that all 911 calls be recorded. Mark all body cameras involved in this incident. In the distance, Reynolds and Grant remained motionless in their designated spots. No one spoke to them. No one explained. The cameras on their chests continued to record the silence. The couple were separated for individual questioning. The husband stated definitively that he saw Brooks suddenly pull the car door open. The woman was more hesitant. She said she might have misunderstood, that she wasn't sure what she saw. Two statements, two different versions. The supervisor took notes, showing no emotion. He had seen enough to know when a story was beginning to unravel. Back at the station that evening, the footage was uploaded to the system. There was nothing ambiguous in the video. Brooks unlocked the car with the key down. No signs of vandalism. No threatening behavior bide. In contrast, the body cam clearly showed the officers failing to separate the parties involved, failing to control the informant, escalating the tone without basis. The audio from the 911 call was replayed. Every word was listened to carefully. The description, the emphasis on skin color, the attribution of a criminal motive without evidence. The timeline was reconstructed minute by minute. And one detail stood out clearly: the license plate wasn't checked from the start, even though that would have been the simplest way to end the incident. The following morning, the Internal Department officially opened an investigation. Reeson and Grant were briefly informed. They were placed on administrative leave pending review. Their badges and weapons were temporarily confiscated, proper procedure. No exceptions. There was no debate. No lengthy explanations needed. At this point, the story is no longer a parking lot misunderstanding. It has become a record, and that record is speaking for itself, revealing everything that no one can deny anymore. The investigation didn't last as long as many expected. The evidence was overwhelming. No speculation. No emotional interpretation. Rezin's personal file was reopened in its entirety. Old complaints previously closed due to lack of evidence were reviewed again, this time against the East Ridge parking lot footage. When the events were pieced together, a pattern of behavior became clear: unnecessary escalation, biased language, and a tendency to side with the accuser without verification. Grant's file was less extensive, but not clean. Internal notes showed he had been reprimanded for communication and handling of the situation. This body cam footage showed that wasn't accidental. He didn't just stand by, he contributed to the situation escalating. The conclusion was written. Reeson was fired for breach of procedure, biased execution, and failure to de-escalate the situation. Grant was fired for aiding and abetting discrimination and participating in unprovoked detention. The union filed an appeal. The case was reviewed. The appeal was dismissed. In another development, the couple's case was transferred to the prosecutor's office. The 911 call was central to the case. The language used, the misrepresentation, the intent to provoke a coercive response. They were prosecuted for making a false report and disturbing the peace. A court date was set. Civil liability is still under consideration. The police department issued a brief statement. No blame. No justification. Just acknowledgement of the events and the outcome, emphasizing that the behavior did not reflect the values of the force. But for those who saw the video, the important thing wasn't in the statement. It was that this time, responsibility wasn't glossed over. A few days later, in a closed-door briefing room at the police department, Daniel Brooks sat at the head of the table with the command staff. No press. No cameras. just a large screen playing replays of footage from the East Ridge parking lot. No one spoke while the video played. Images of Brooks standing next to the SUV, approaching footsteps, irrelevant questions, hands resting on arms for too long, and the silence as prejudiced words rang out. When the video stopped, Brooks finally spoke. His voice was even not reproachful. There was no moment here that needed to escalate. He said, there was no threat, no crime. He paused, then continued, but things still escalated. No one contradicted him. Brooks looked around the table. I want to make one thing clear, he said. The outcome of this situation changed, not because the truth was discovered sooner. It changed because of my identity. The words hung in the air. If I weren't chief, he continued, this could have ended very differently. And that's the problem. Brooks didn't ask for an apology. He issued orders. Review the entire stop and detain process. Provide additional training on bias and de-escalation. Reopen old complaints that had been closed too quickly. The law cannot depend on status, he said. And if it is, then we have to fix it. The meeting ended in silence. No one left the room with a sense of relief. But everyone understood that this was no longer an isolated incident. It had become a test. And this time, the system couldn't pretend not to see the questions being asked. The incident at the East Ridge parking lot quickly spread. The video was shared. No commentary needed. No sensational headlines needed. The images spoke for themselves. A man doing everything right. A call fueled by prejudice. And a system that only stops when confronted with a power greater than itself. For many viewers, the shock wasn't Brooks being the sheriff. It was that only when that identity was revealed did the law-abiding process begin to unfold. If he were just an ordinary black man, if he had no title, if there were no cameras, would the story have ended this way? That question wasn't asked in court. It was asked in the minds of millions of viewers. Resin and Grant lost their careers. The couple faced legal consequences. The police department had to admit its mistakes. But Brooks understood clearly, punishment doesn't equate to correction. A system doesn't change just because one incident is exposed. It only changes when moments like this are no longer allowed to repeat themselves in silence. This story isn't about an SUV. It's not about a parking lot. And it's not just about racism. It's about how power operates. About who can be suspected. And who must prove their innocence. If justice only appears when there are cameras, if the law only works properly when the person being held has high status, then the problem isn't with individuals, it's with the structure. And that's why stories like this need to be told. Not to stir outrage for one day, but to remind us that today's normalcy can become tomorrow's injustice if no one speaks up. If you believe accountability is essential, then share. Because these moments aren't captured spontaneously, and justice, if not monitored, is easily lost.